The fluorescent lights of the police interrogation room hummed with a frequency that made DeShawn Williams's headache worse. He'd been here for 6 hours. 6 hours since Officer Rick Brennan had pulled him over for driving suspiciously 3 blocks from his own home. 6 hours since his life had turned upside down. "I'm telling you, I don't know anything about a robbery," DeShawn repeated, his voice hoarse. He was 47 years old, a civil engineer with the city's Department of Public Works, a father of 2, and somehow he was being treated like a criminal. Detective Linda Martinez looked uncomfortable. She'd seen the dashcam footage. DeShawn had committed no traffic violation, but Brennan had called in backup, claiming DeShawn matched the description of a suspect in an armed robbery from 2 weeks ago. The description: black male, approximately 6 feet tall, between 30 to 50 years old. In a city where that described roughly 40,000 men, Officer Brennan had somehow been certain it was DeShawn driving a Volvo sedan in a residential neighborhood at 7 p.m. on a Thursday. "The convenience store clerk couldn't identify you from the photo array," Martinez said carefully. "You're free to go, Mr. Williams." DeShawn stood, his body aching from hours in a metal chair. "That's it. No apology, no explanation for why I was pulled out of my car at gunpoint in front of my neighbors." Martinez's silence was answer enough. When DeShawn finally made it home, his wife Patricia was waiting, her face drawn with worry. Their daughter Keisha, home from college for the summer, had filmed the entire stop from their porch. The video was already circulating on social media. "Daddy, everyone's seeing this," Keisha said, her voice shaking. "They're saying terrible things in the comments." DeShawn watched the footage, watched himself, hands raised, complying with every command. Watched Brennan's aggressive posturing, the way he'd forced DeShawn to the ground despite complete cooperation. Watched his neighbors gathering, their faces shocked and afraid. "I did everything right," DeShawn said quietly. "Everything they tell you to do to stay safe, and it didn't matter." Patricia took his hand. "So what do we do now?" DeShawn looked at his daughter, at his wife, at the video playing on loop. "We fight back." Attorney James Thornton had made his name defending civil rights cases that others wouldn't touch. At 61, he'd been in the courtroom since before DeShawn was born, and he knew exactly what he was looking at. "Officer Brennan has been the subject of 14 complaints in the past 8 years, Thornton said, spreading files across his desk, all involving Black or Latino individuals, all dismissed by the department's internal review board. But here's what's interesting. 5 of those 14 people were arrested on false charges that were later dropped, and 3 of those 5 sued the department." "What happened to those cases?" DeShawn asked. "Settled quietly. NDAs all around. The department made the problem go away with money and silence." Thornton leaned forward. "But here's what they didn't count on. I represent 2 of those 3 people. They can't talk about their specific cases, but they can testify about Officer Brennan's pattern of behavior in your case." Over the next weeks, the case grew. A former officer named David Chen came forward, testifying that he'd been pushed out of the department after reporting Brennan's behavior. Community members documented their own encounters, and then the breakthrough came. A paralegal named Sophie Rodriguez was doing routine discovery when she found them. Text messages between Brennan and 3 other officers, part of a group chat called the Cleanup Crew. The messages were filled with slurs, jokes about their arrests, and explicit discussions of targeting specific neighborhoods. One message, sent the day before DeShawn's stop, read, "Working the Heights tonight. Time to remind them whose streets these are." The Heights was DeShawn's neighborhood, a predominantly black middle-class area that had seen rapid development in recent years. When Thornton presented the messages to the city attorney, the response was immediate, an offer to settle. "They're offering $250,000, Thornton told DeShawn, with an NDA, of course. DeShawn looked at the offer for a long time. It was more money than his family had ever seen. It could pay for Keisha's graduate school, help his son Marcus with his business, set them up for retirement. "What do you think I should do?" he asked. Thornton set down his pen. "I think you already know. That's why you came to me instead of taking the first settlement offer you got. You want this in public. You want accountability." DeShawn thought about the 14 complaints, the other victims silenced by NDAs, the pattern that would continue if someone didn't stop it. "We go to trial," he said. "If this story is gripping you, hit that subscribe button. What comes next will restore your faith in justice." The courtroom was packed. Local media, community activists, and curious citizens filled every seat. DeShawn sat at the plaintiff's table, his family behind him, and watched as Officer Rick Brennan took the stand. Brennan was 42, a 15-year veteran of the force, and he looked confident in his pressed uniform. The city's attorney, Howard Walsh, led him through a carefully crafted narrative of a concerned officer making a reasonable stop. Then James Thornton stood for cross-examination. "Officer Brennan, you testified that Mr. Williams matched the description of an armed robbery suspect. Can you tell the court that description?" "Black male, approximately 6 feet tall, between 30 and 50 years old," Brennan recited. "And Mr. Williams is a black man, approximately 6 feet tall, aged 47. Is that correct?" "Yes. Do you know how many black men in this city fit that description, officer?" Walsh objected, but the judge allowed it. I don't have that number," Brennan admitted. Thornton pulled out a document. "According to census data, approximately 42,000 men in this city fit that description, yet you were certain Mr. Williams was your suspect. Why?" "He was in the area where the robbery occurred. The robbery occurred on March 3rd. You stopped Mr. Williams on March 17th. 14 days later, in a neighborhood 3 miles from the robbery location, where Mr. Williams lives, with his family, in a home he's owned for 12 years. Thornton's voice was calm but relentless. "Does that sound like suspicious behavior to you, officer?" The next few days were devastating for the defense. Sophie Rodriguez's discovery of the text messages became Exhibit A. David Chen testified about the culture of racism in the department and his attempts to report it. The other victims, while bound by NDAs about their specific cases, testified about Brennan's pattern of aggressive stops and false accusations. But the moment that changed everything came from an unexpected source. Officer Amy Sullivan had been Brennan's partner for 6 months before requesting a transfer. When Thornton called her as a witness, the city's attorneys looked panicked. "Officer Sullivan, why did you request a transfer from Officer Brennan?" Sullivan took a deep breath. She was 32, 8 years on the force, and her hands shook as she held the witness stand rail. "Because I couldn't be party to what he was doing anymore." The courtroom went silent. "Can you elaborate?" "Rick, Officer Brennan, he had certain neighborhoods he liked to work. He called it keeping them in line. He would find reasons to stop people, usually for nothing, and if they questioned him, if they knew their rights, he'd escalate. I saw him plant evidence twice. I saw him use excessive force on compliant suspects, and when I reported it to our sergeant, I was told to be a team player." Walsh jumped up, objecting, but Sullivan continued. "I became a cop to help people, to protect my community. What Rick was doing, that wasn't protection, that was terror, and I'm done being silent about it." The jury deliberated for 7 hours. When they returned, the forewoman was a 63-year-old retired teacher named Helen Chang. She looked directly at DeShawn as she read the verdict. "In the matter of Williams v. Brennan and the City Police Department, we find in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. We award compensatory damages in the amount of $100,000 and punitive damages in the amount of $100,000 and punitive damages in the amount of $2.5 million. The courtroom erupted. Patricia grabbed DeShawn's hand. Keisha was crying, but DeShawn just felt exhausted. The verdict made national news. "Jury awards $2.6 million in racial profiling case," read the headlines, but the real impact came in the weeks that followed. The Department of Justice announced a civil rights investigation into the police department. The text message scandal forced the resignation of the police chief and 2 senior commanders. Officers Brennan and the 3 others in the cleanup crew were fired and faced federal charges. Officer Sullivan was promoted to detective and put in charge of a new accountability unit. The City Council, under pressure from community activists emboldened by the verdict, passed sweeping police reform measures, mandatory body cameras, an independent review board with actual power, and a ban on pretextual stops. But perhaps most importantly, the 3 other victims who'd been silenced by NDAs came forward publicly, their settlements voided by the criminal investigation. Their stories, combined with DeShawn's case, painted a picture of systematic abuse that could no longer be ignored. This is what happens when one person refuses to be silenced. Stay with us, the best part is coming. Subscribe to the Unheard stories. 6 months after the verdict, DeShawn stood in front of a community center packed with young people. He'd been invited to speak about his experience, about fighting injustice, about the long road to accountability. "I want to be clear about something," he told the crowd. "What happened to me wasn't special. It wasn't unique. It was Tuesday. It was what happens to black and brown people in this country every single day. The only difference is that my daughter had the presence of mind to film it. I had a wife who told me to fight, and I had the privilege of resources and support that many victims don't have." He paused, looking at the young faces watching him. "But here's what I learned. Change doesn't happen because powerful people suddenly decide to be fair. Change happens because ordinary people refuse to accept injustice. It happens when one person stands up, and then another, and another, until the system can't ignore us anymore." In the audience sat Amy Sullivan, the officer who testified against her former partner. After the speech, she approached DeShawn. "Mr. Williams, I wanted to apologize. I should have spoken up sooner, before you were stopped." Before DeShawn held up a hand, "You spoke up when it mattered. That took courage, real courage, and because you did, the next person won't have to go through what I did." "I hope you're right," Sullivan said quietly. "I know I am, because we changed the system, we made them listen, and now we hold them accountable." As DeShawn drove home that evening, he passed the spot where Brennan had pulled him over. A small memorial had appeared there, flowers, candles, and a sign that read, "Justice for DeShawn, justice for all." He pulled into his driveway, where Patricia was watering the garden, and Marcus was helping his little sister with homework through the window. This was what he'd fought for, not the money, not the headlines, but this, the simple, radical act of living free, of existing in his own neighborhood without fear, of knowing that when his children drove these streets, they'd do so in a city that was just a little bit safer, a little bit more fair. Patricia walked over as he got out of the car. "How'd it go?" "Good," he said, taking her hand. "Really good. I think we're making a difference." She smiled. "I never doubted it, not for a second." That night, DeShawn's phone buzzed with a message from James Thornton. "3 more cases filed today, all citing your verdict as precedent. The dam is breaking." DeShawn read the message twice, then looked out at his neighborhood, his home, and felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not naive hope. Not the belief that everything was fixed, but the hard-won knowledge that change was possible, that justice, real justice, could be fought for and won, and that was worth everything. These stories matter because they're happening right now, in communities across America. If DeShawn's fight moved you, if Amy's courage inspired you, then subscribe to the Unheard Stories. Help us share these voices. Help us demand accountability. Help us build a more just world, one story at a time. Hit that subscribe button, because every voice deserves to be heard. The end.